we're going to go, first of all, to the big story of the day. It looks like Reform are, according to this opinion poll, the official opposition. Am I right? You saw it coming first, Iain?
Well, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration to say they're the official opposition. YouGov have always placed Reform higher than other opinion polling companies in their surveys. I'm not saying they're wrong at all, but this is just one poll. And obviously Nigel Farage has got very excited about it. Of course he would. And this happened also in the 2019 European elections, I mean, different elections. But the Brexit Party, as it then was, overtook the Conservatives, and the Conservatives ended up with 9% of the vote on polling day. Now, again, I'm not predicting that will happen, but no political party has a right to be in second place in the polls. But this is significant, even though it is one poll. And I did a podcast 6 weeks ago with somebody, and I said it's possible during the campaign that Reform could overtake the Conservatives. I'm not sure I really believed it would happen. It's nice to get one prediction right.
I suppose, in a way, what Nigel Farage is saying is this came after they released the details of what I think will be in their final manifesto around about June the 17th. I may have got that date.
Monday,
yeah. So they say people have looked at what we're saying, we've looked at what we're doing, and we've gone up. I mean,
well,
Jacqui?
They would say that, wouldn't they? But
well, they might say it to be right.
Well, this is... I mean, I think Iain's right. This is one poll. Let's wait and see. But what it does do is it enables Nigel Farage to play the Tories' argument back against them. Because, remember, the Conservatives have essentially all but given up and are now saying, you've got to... You know, we're the only people that can be the opposition to Labour. So if you don't want a massive Labour majority, you've got to vote for us. So Nigel Farage, in the debate last night, turns that around to Penny Mordaunt and says, well, actually, we're the people you need to vote for now if you don't want to get an enormous Labour majority, which puts the Tories in a difficult position, because this is sort of where they've fallen back on now.
Well, what do you make of David Davis saying that, you know, it's one thing to have polls, but on the doorsteps, people are not coming out and saying they're voting Reform? Do you think there's a bunch of secret Reform voters, those who are just simply not prepared to say that they are going to vote Reform? And there is an unfortunate sort of London slightly snobby stigma that's attached to voting Reform, and that's a problem for all political parties to acknowledge.
It is. It used to be shy Tories, people who wouldn't admit that they were going to vote Conservative because somehow sort of metropolitan media had made them feel slightly ashamed of doing so. And I think that there is a factor with Reform on
I've been amazed by the number of people who've come up to me and said, you won't believe this, because I've never expressed any opinions that you might associate with Reform before, but I am secretly going to vote Reform. Well, I wonder if that... I mean, that's purely anecdotal, but I wonder if that's translated to other parts of the country where people might get a shock.
There is always one party which was referred to as the dustbin vote, people who want to protest. So if you're an unhappy Conservative, but you still want to vote for somebody on the right, you'll protest by voting for Reform, even if you think Nigel Farage might go a bit far on some things. And it's the same, I think, with some Labour voters, because Reform aren't just getting their support from the Conservatives.
I've knocked on a few doors, and quite a few doors, actually, and I would say it's certainly possible, because what I quite often hear from former Conservative voters is a sort of... the most frequent thing you hear is a sigh, actually, a sort of, oh, dear, I'm so disappointed. And they haven't made up their minds, or they're not saying what they're going to vote instead, but they know they're not going to vote Conservative. So those may well be people that are going to...
Is there another complexion here, which is that, you know, if Reform does well, you know, they might not get many seats, they're predicted to get roughly about 4. The chances are there's a possibility, if Farage gets his seat, that the parties could unite, you know, and...
he's certainly hailing himself.
He's certainly hailing that as a possibility. And, you know, Penny Mordaunt was asked that last night in the debate. If you watch her, there was no clear denial.
Should we have a look?
Let's have a look.
I'm a Brexiteer. I believe that if you can't reform European institutions, you should be prepared to leave them. I set up a business before getting into Parliament, so that's why I always back business. And I believe in rewarding personal responsibility. You might think I have a lot in common with Nigel. But what I'm standing against is letting you in and letting you tax the hell out of people. Nigel is helping you do that. So I think we've probably got less in common than you might imagine.
So the you there was Labour, and she was gesticulating, wasn't she, towards Angela Rayner. What do you make of that, Jacqui?
There's quite a dividing line in the Conservative Party at the moment between those who, as they vie for who's going to be the leader after the general election, between those who are sort of reasonably open about saying, yes, we should invite Nigel Farage in, those who are a bit coyer, like Penny was, but nevertheless didn't say no, and those who've sort of said, well, no, that's not what we should do. So
there's a confused... I mean, what was it? She listed all the similarities and then highlighted the difference being we're standing for keeping Labour out. But actually, everything that Nigel Farage says is similar to that. So, therefore, she's only just highlighted another difference.
If you have a split opposition, whether you're on the right or the left, that helps the other lot win.
Yeah.
I mean, back in the 1980s, when you had Labour and the SDP and the Liberals, I mean, cancelling each other out, led to Margaret Thatcher getting a huge majority. And that could happen this time. Now, after the election, I mean, Nigel Farage was a member of the Conservative Party. Most of his instincts are Conservative, with a small c.
Yeah.
And the Conservative Party ought to be a sort of big tent coalition that can have Nigel Farage and people on the left of the Conservative Party coexisting in the same party. So I wouldn't rule out that happening after the election. There will be some Conservatives who would regard that Nigel Farage as beyond the pale and leave. But you can't win elections without having a sort of big tent coalition within your own party.
By the way, I might be wrong, but I would have thought 4 seats for Reform would be quite a lot.
Well, that's on some of the predicted numbers. I mean, who knows? The polls have never, ever, I think it's fair to say, been less reliable than they are now and less sort of out of whack, to say the very least. It's not.
Well, we'll have to see, won't we?
Well, we sure will. On out of whack, seeing as I've started there and can't get out of it.
We're all feeling a little out of whack now.
I'm wondering what's coming.
The Labour manifesto, Jacqui. You know, the British people are not stupid, right? You can make promises and give out sweeties, but, you know, they're looking at the detail. Wouldn't you agree that this is pretty light on the detail? And what it's looking to do is to ostensibly say, right, growth is going to pay for everything. Don't worry, we're a Labour Party. We're not going to invest or take back, for example, big-ticket items, bring back public services into public ownership. Our big thing is wealth creation. Is that a surprise to you as the way in which they want to, as it were, wrap this up for the British public?
Well, it's not a surprise, given that that's the approach that Keir Starmer has taken ever since he's been thinking about describing a potential future Labour government to the public. And the only thing I would say is, you said, oh, people promised sweeties. I mean, if you were at that launch yesterday, there weren't a lot of sweeties going around. The point was, and he's trying to make a sort of benefit of this, I'm not promising you any sweeties. I'm not pulling any rabbits out of any hats. I'm telling you things are going to be difficult. And that's why you can trust me, because actually previously people have made lots of promises. They've put your taxes up to record levels. I'm going to tell you how difficult and careful I'm going to be about running the country.
So sort of Captain Cautious, I suppose, is one way he's been described in that sense. But if you look at the manifesto and if you heard everything that the party was saying after it was announced, it was like, I reject the idea we can't grow wealth. I reject we can't do it because there's so many different organisations saying, hang on a minute, this is all banking on growing wealth. So what did you see in the manifesto and what do you understand is their plan to grow that wealth that they're banking everything on?
Well, first of all, the interesting thing about this manifesto, compared to many of the manifestos that I fought on, is it does absolutely have growth at the heart of it. You know, Keir Starmer has gone on and on about the fact...
So, but where? Just to help us that are trying to unpick it.
So, for example, He has, first of all, they've argued that stability is the most important thing to enable businesses to invest.
That's what Rishi Sunak had always said.
Yeah,
though.
but you could hardly claim that the Conservative government over the last few years has delivered stability.
True.
Right. Secondly, that there are things that are holding business back, like planning regulation that they can liberalise, so that you can build your gigafactory or your...
But if Michael Gove hasn't been able to do that, what makes you confident that Labour will be able to do it? Well, he's radical reforming Secretary of State, whatever you think of his politics. He did that in education. He's been unable to reform the planning
what
system.
he was doing was... Well, I don't think he went as far as Labour is proposing to go. He didn't.
But he wanted to.
For example.
He wanted to.
Well, why didn't he then?
Because of all the vested interests that stopped him.
Well, but he didn't even change the things that Labour is saying that they're going to change, like putting an expectation on councils about building new homes and finding a way in order to ensure that that happens, devolving more responsibility down to mayors to develop growth plans locally where they're likely to know what are the things that are going to help their regions to grow. So those are just some of the things. But, you know, I completely accept that it is a very big ask of growth to fill the gap that Labour have been very careful not to say that they're going to fill with tax revenues. Having said that, the biggest determinant of how much money you raise from tax is how big your economy is and whether or not it's growing.
But the issue, I think, is deeper than that, in that a lot of people say, well, I mean, who doesn't want growth? I mean, it's not something that everybody's going to disagree with. Liz Truss wanted growth. Yeah. She just went about it in a rather different and calamitous way. You have to, if you want to understand how business grows, you have to understand business. Now, I can't think of any of Labour's front bench who's ever even run a business, and I think that is a disadvantage. If you're going to expand the economy, you have to understand how you incentivise people to start new businesses and encourage entrepreneurs into the country and not to leave the country. And if you're promising to put up taxes, which they are, £9 billion worth, plus a lot of...
Which they've already spelt out how they're doing that.
They have done that.
Yeah.
But we all know that there are going to be other tax rises, and they're being very coy on that. And I think that's where the Conservatives have actually scored a few points this week, moving the agenda onto tax and trying to force Labour to outline where these other tax rises would come from.
We know it's going to be fuel duty. Do you think
we know it's going to be capital gains tax.
Do you think that's going to go up?
I think they're being enormously careful because that isn't the area that they want to fight the election on. I think they are...
Because they know that they might have to do it?
No, because they know that one of the things that Tories will try to tar Labour with is the suggestion that somehow or another they're not careful with the public's money. That's why they're being so cautious about, not just about what they're saying about tax, but to be fair, they're not promising enormous amounts in terms of the public service either.
What will happen is that in the first budget, which Rachel Reeves will probably deliver in October or November, she will open with the lines... well, of course, we've now looked at the books. Right. Things are far worse than we thought they would be. So I'm afraid, I said, we didn't want to raise taxes, but I'm afraid we're forced to. That will happen.
The other point about raising taxes is we already have record levels of taxes.
Exactly.
Sure, so we don't want more.
So there's a real hypocrisy. I completely understand why Penny Mordaunt bangs on about the dodgy £2,000 figure the whole time. Of course I understand that, because that's the territory they want to be on. But they're hardly on strong ground, having raised taxes.
I know, but Ian's talking about the situation after Labour has won. So the battle of the looking back stopped, in a sense, that they've looked at the books and decided they have to raise taxes. That's what people fear.
When Labour's won is quite a big... that's doing quite a lot of work in there, Kate. And the first thing you have to do...
that. I'm talking about what Ian was describing.
Yeah, but in order to
Labour's won.
In order to win... They have decided, I think rightly, that if you get tarred with a sort of high tax brush, if you make unfunded promises and people think, well, inevitably that's going to put my taxes up even more than they might think they're going to.
The problem is,
then
by
you're
not
less likely to be there
clearly,
in the first place.
People aren't daft, and it's allowed the Conservatives and other parties to allow tax to dominate the debate.
Because, trust me, had he yesterday made more announcements about tax and more announcements about spending, everybody would be pouring... You know, if he had pulled that rabbit out of the hat, by this point it would be dissected and everybody would be pouring all over it.
There doesn't seem to be sort of any big vision. I've said this on the programme before, and it's what I hear as well, being stopped in the street by people, that it's not enough just not to be the Conservative Party. That's one thing. And the other thing is, when you're talking about economic growth over time, that takes time. And here, the IFS, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, said these are trivial public service spending increase and tax rises with no definitive spending promises to tackle the problems facing the country. That's their accusation against the Labour manifesto. And on the other hand, you've got somebody, with great experience, our very own Ed Balls, who says, why would you make a commitment to say you're not going to raise taxes when, exactly as Iain Dale says, in all likelihood, everybody knows, and the British public aren't stupid, you either have to cut spending, which the Labour Party are promising not to do, or raise taxes, because the things you're talking about, growing the economy, takes a good deal of time.
So what Ed was talking about, I think, particularly, was whether or not, with the fiscal rules that Labour has set, they have constrained themselves. Yes, they clearly have. But Ed knows, because he was around in 1997, that you need to... And, at that point, remember, Labour said they were going to stick to the Conservative spending plans for the first 2 years, because that was what was necessary to give people confidence at that point that they could vote Labour in 1997, when, remember, they hadn't done in 1992 because they believed that Labour was going to unreasonably put up their taxes and was going to be irresponsible with their money. That's Labour's big battle, and that's what they have to continuously fight against if they're going to win an election. Because there have been plenty of times, let's not forget...
No big vision, no big view...
I don't necessarily...
No big view about the country and any sort of policies that really going to make radical changes.
I don't agree with you about that, Rob.
Your money is safe with us.
Well, that is quite an important thing to say to people at a time when they're facing the cost of living crisis. But they're also saying, it's a sort of slogan, but you can see what they're getting at. Security and stability is change in this election, given everything that people have had to go through.
What about a social
over the
care
last
plan?
5 years?
How's that coming on?
There is a proposal in the manifesto to develop a national care service. Yeah, of course.
Which feels like a plan.
Boris Johnson stood on the steps of Downing Street and he told us he had
Jacqui,
a plan.
It's a plan for a plan.
And he failed to deliver.
I mean, what are you selling the public
But you can say what you like.
You've had 14 years to work out a plan in opposition. Why haven't they done it?
There is quite...
That's a reverse argument of they've had 14 years to fix it. You're spinning beautifully this morning. Shall we talk about the man who is currently Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who looked at the G7 yesterday like a different person from the man that appeared on the debate the night before on Sky. He just looked buoyed up, surrounded by... Let's have a look. There we go. That's the Italian. I missed that. Yeah, hugging, kissing, happy,
space.
delighted. He was there with, all the others, Joe Biden, and also, of course, Macron as well, too. Is that a genuine delight that he would say, possibly, that he's getting on with business, securing funding for Ukraine, or is he sort of relieved to be out the country?
Well, I suppose it all depends on whether he comes home early, doesn't it? I mean, he looked there as if he was having a good time. It's actually quite difficult for a Prime Minister in the middle of an election campaign. You have the advantage of all these pictures which show him as a statesman meeting all the world leaders. But on the other hand, he's not in the election campaign for however long he's at the G7. Margaret Thatcher used to hate going, because I think there always seems to be a G7 or a G20 during election campaigns. I remember she had to go to one, I think, in Williamsburg in America. And although, the pictures were fantastic, she felt that she was letting her party down by being out of the country during a campaign.
Well, the decision he made, you could argue, to return and not take part in the full D-Day celebrations in Normandy, to be there for the British but not for the international one, where he would have been pictured with Biden and all those other leaders that you were mentioning, to come back was a decision to fight the campaign. So has he learned a lesson?
Well, you would hope so, because I think if we're sitting here in a month's time reviewing the campaign, I think we'll all agree that was one of the defining moments of the campaign. In 20 years' time, when people are writing books about election campaigns, they will use that as probably the most memorable
We were
moment.
here together when, as it were, he left them on the beaches. And it was a staggering moment. People ask, who is it that advises him? But surely you should have the political nous in the first place to know whatever your advice.
Or as the veterans feel, the want to be there.
Precisely.
That's the problem that's still going on.
Nobody can pretend that the optics were good on that, but he has been let down by many of his advisors during this campaign. I know the buck stops with him. The buck stops with him. However, you're given the grid, and unless something triggers off in your mind, well, that's a bit odd. I mean, I think David Cameron actually should have stopped him from doing that.
He says he tried.
What would you make of that optic, of all of those?
But yesterday on our programme, he said, actually, the report in the Times that said he tried and was apoplectic, was the quote, when he heard what had happened, he actually denied.
What, so he didn't try? I mean, that is...
He doubled down on
worse.
supporting Rishi's decision.
Just not having, you know, basic instinct to connect with what matters to the British public and our history. And I think everybody sort of understands...
It was a lack of historical knowledge, because I remember in 1984 when Ronald Reagan made that famous speech at the Point du Hoc with that sort of memorial behind him. Bill Clinton did the same 10 years on, but I don't think Rishi Sunak will have clocked those.
Yeah, there's quite a visual there. I mean, apart from Maloney, who is probably buoyed by how well the right and, one might argue, the far right are doing in Europe, pretty much every leader who's smiling for the cameras there looks very much like there was a good chance they might be here today and gone tomorrow, right?
Perhaps that's why he was feeling sort of happy to go, because he could compare notes and think to himself, well, you know...
How's yours going?
Time's tough, but,
Mine's
you know...
different.
And there's Emmanuel Macron saying, you know, hold my beer, I'm going to hold a snap general election because I'm behind in the polls and hope that something is going to go right as well.
Yeah,
one person who is very happy at the moment, I have to say, I did have a look at this, and I'm always interested in how politicians present themselves. You talk about Margaret Thatcher and her being Gordon Reist and changing hats and so on and so forth. Ed Davey got a This Morning makeover. Where is it? Let's just have a look at this.
People change their image during campaigns, but this was an unusual way to do it. Here he is, leader of the Lib Democrats, getting on the catwalk on This Morning and wandering up and down. This is his new look. It was pointed out to him. There you go. Ben just having just tilting the tip-fur in the right way. It was pointed out that he was wearing a blue shirt, but he said...
It's fading.
It's fading. It's fading. It's fading away. And I think Jason Donovan, who was also on the show, said he looked great, but he wouldn't wear it himself.
So he thought it was sexy, that's what he said.
He said he was sexy. He said he was sexy, but he wouldn't wear the same outfit, which is... We're all different.
I was used to describe Ed Davey as charismatically challenged. But this campaign, I mean, he seems to be having the time of his life. But how many people switched their votes to the Liberal Democrats by watching Ed Davey fall into a muddy river? I mean, I suppose it does bring the whole...
It might give him a profile. They've been criticised for years.
It does, but
Totally
is it a really good profile? Well, we will see on polling day. Right. I mean, I think it's been quite an innovative campaign strategy, but it's quite a risky one.
Well, it's slightly Borisy, isn't it, to create the idea of a connection through...
We just need a zip wire now, don't we?
No, right.
I don't know what the agenda is for today, but we may find a zip wire
But you see, every single programme is now thinking, what stunt can we offer Ed Davey to do?
Well, also, though, OK, let's look at the other side of it. There will be... You know, we're supposed to be going into summer. There will be lots of ordinary people thinking, particularly those who watched This Morning, oh, how can I revamp my hubby? How can I revamp my partner? What can I do about it? And they will think he's just like every other bloke, not sure what to wear when the sun comes out. Is there any argument for that?
No, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Because, you know, one of the things that people are always saying is, oh, they're out of touch, they don't understand the sort of things that we worry about. So that's exactly right.
Will you be advising Keir to be on next week?
Keir always looks fantastic.
She's just...
I had a This Morning makeover a week after the general election
in
1997. You don't need one, love. Look at your fabulous tie. And...
Although, if you did, I'm just not sure you'd look like a sort of fifth-rate mafia don, which was sort of the outcome
You mean because I already do?
It's a classic look. It's linen, it's shades, it's a Panama. You can't go wrong, surely, with that.